morning. My name is Evie Russell, and I'm with the Office of Undergraduate Research. And welcome to the second day of the showcase. This morning, our first session will consist of psychology presentations from 8 students. And with us this morning, we have Miss Lynn Heiler, who will be moderating this session. So just to go over a few housekeeping things, this presentation will be recorded, so please know that. Questions are encouraged. You can use the Q&A button on your toolbar to answer those, to ask those questions. And if you are the presenter, just make sure that you check that Q&A. And if you can't see it, I had several students yesterday who couldn't. Lynn can actually, or I can read those questions to you. Please do not use the raise hand function because that has been disabled. All right. So without further ado, let's get this party started. Our first presenter is Simone Bibbs. Simone works with Dr. Krista Brown in the Department of Psychology. Simone, are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'll be discussing my study looking at youth ethnic identity salience, peer group racial ethnic diversity, and their impacts on perceived experiences of racial ethnic bias. For a little bit of background, peer groups have been shown to serve as important context for the expression of youth's racial ethnic identity and their experiences of discrimination. Youth have reported experiences of ethnic discrimination from peers in the forms of social exclusion, name-calling, and unfair treatment. And previous studies have shown that ethnic minority individuals with a more salient ethnic identity, meaning they more frequently think about being their race ethnicity, receive more discrimination than those with a less salient ethnic identity. Further, group composition has also been shown to affect identity salience, specifically aspects of an individual's identity that are underrepresented within a group tend to be more salient to them. With all this in mind, this current study assessed the influence of ethnic identity salience and racial diversity of peer groups on youth perceptions of racial and ethnic bias. We hypothesized that children with a more salient ethnic identity would report more experiences of discrimination. We also predicted that peer group makeup would moderate the relationship between salience and perceived discrimination, such that children with friend groups of a different race ethnicity than their own would report a more salient ethnic identity and more frequent perceptions of discrimination. Participants were 63 children aged 6 through 11 years old, 67.2% were boys and 32.8% were girls. We asked children to self-describe their race ethnicity, and 35.1% identified as white, 7.9% as Black, 3.5% as biracial white and Black, 4.4% as Latinx Hispanic, 2.6% as Asian, and 2.6% as another race ethnicity. Going on to measures, we asked children a few demographic questions measuring gender, self-described race ethnicity, and age. Then ethnic identity salience was measured with the question, how often do you think about being your ethnicity? Responses ranged from 1, almost never, to 4, every day. 4 every day indicates a high ethnic identity salience and 1, a low ethnic identity salience. Peer group racial ethnic diversity among children was measured with the question, how would you describe your friends? Responses ranged from 1, mostly white, to 5, a mix of ethnicities. And if you go down to the left side of my poster, the left bottom corner, that's figure 1, and that's the image that was used to assess racial ethnic composition of friends groups. Children were shown this image and then asked to choose one of the 5 that most closely resembled their friend groups. It's important to note that friend groups of biracial children were labeled uncategorizable. Due to their multiracial identity, we were unable to assertively distinguish them as same race ethnicity or different race ethnicity peer groups. And finally, perceived experiences of racial ethnic discrimination was measured using a series of questions assessing discrimination from teachers and from peers. An example question is, does your teacher ever treat you unfairly because of your ethnicity? Responses ranged from 1, not much, to 2, 4, a lot. Going into results, if you'll look at the top right corner of the poster, that is figure 3, and that is a pie chart depicting peer group racial ethnic diversity among children. 44.6% of children had a different race ethnicity friend group. 37.5 had a same race ethnicity friend group, and then 17.9% in the gray is that uncategorized friend group of biracial participants. To the left of figure 3 is another pie chart, and that is depicting racial ethnic composition of peer groups broken down by specific race ethnicities. So 46% of peer groups were mostly white, 34% in that light blue were a mix of ethnicities, 13% of friend groups were mostly Black, 5% were mostly Asian, and 2% were mostly Latinx. We found that peer group racial diversity did not predict perceptions of discrimination. However, we did find that ethnic identity salience significantly predicted perceptions of racial discrimination. Children who thought about their ethnicity more frequently perceived more discrimination. And that's shown in figure 4 below the pie charts. That's a linear regression model, just depicting that significant relationship between ethnic identity salience and perceived experiences of ethnic bias. And finally, we found that peer group racial ethnic diversity did not moderate the relationship between ethnic identity salience and perceptions of discrimination as we had hypothesized. In conclusion, we found that most children had a racially diverse friend group, and their ethnic identity salience impacted perceptions of discrimination, such that those with a more salient ethnic identity perceived more discrimination, which replicates past research. However, we found that peer group racial diversity did not appear to influence the relationship between ethnic identity salience and perceived experiences of racial ethnic discrimination. Future research should further examine the ways that having racially diverse peer groups impacts children's perceptions of discrimination, as well as their experiences of discrimination. And of course, no study is without its limitations. As far as ours, our study did have a relatively small number of participants at just 63. And additionally, as I mentioned before, around 18% of friend groups of biracial participants were uncategorizable as either same ethnicity or different ethnicity due to the complexities of biracial identity. Thus, further research should investigate this group of children, their friend groups, and their experiences of discrimination. Thank you, that's all. Thank you, Dr. Brown and Charlotte, if you're out there watching. And thank you everyone for listening.
Good job, Simone. That was very good. And I love your poster. It's got a very good layout as well. So our Q&A is open now. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A. It does take a few minutes for things to pop up. Can you see the Q&A, Simone?
Yes, I can.
Okay. If you want to answer it, read the question and then answer it. Go ahead.
This question is, what was your most interesting finding? I think personally for me, considering how small my N was, there was a bit of worry about like statistical power. So just to see that significant relationship between ethnic identity salience and perceptions of discrimination was super exciting. Plus it replicates past research. As I mentioned, prior studies have shown that a more salient ethnic identity in an individual means they tend to perceive more discrimination. So I was just excited to see that in my own research. And I think that's probably the most interesting finding for me. And then another question, any research you'd like to do in the future? It's a great question. I would say that I'm really interested in youth racial ethnic identity formation and even just experiences of bias, anything related to sort of experiences as an ethnic minority youth or development of racial ethnic identity, I definitely want to pursue in the future. I'm not really certain about specifics, but I know that's kind of the general area that I'd like to pursue in the future as far as research.
Any other questions for Simone?
That's all of them. I don't see any new ones.
All right. Thank you very much. It's a great job.
Thank you.
So our next presenter is Destiny. Destiny, you can turn on your camera and share your screen whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Actually, let me see. I think that Evie should have your title screen to show first
Okay.
for the recording. There we go. Destiny. All right.
Okay.
You may start anytime.
Hang on, I'm having some technical difficulties of pulling up my PowerPoint.
Okay.
Alrighty, can everybody see my PowerPoint?
No,
Oh goodness.
I think you need to share screen first.
Okay.
There you go. All right, give it, there you are. We can see it now. You can go ahead and get started.
Okay. So for my presentation, we will be discussing disproportionate discipline and school belonging at elementary age student schools. Just a little background information. Research demonstrates that compared to their white peers, Black students receive disproportionate treatment at school, especially in areas such as school discipline. Unequal treatments in schools in areas such as school discipline can also impact a child's sense of belonging at school. Research in our lab has shown that children stereotyped some students as good, such as students that are white and Asian, and children also stereotype other students as bad, such as Black and Latinx students. This study investigated the link between elementary age students' stereotypes, disproportionate discipline, and sense of belonging at school. We hypothesized that children stereotyped as bad students, which are the Black, biracial, Latinx children, would have a lower school belonging than others. We also hypothesized that experiences of discrimination in discipline will predict lower belonging, and this relationship will be moderated by children's race. This study had a sample of 61 participants between the ages of 6 to 11. The sample also had participants from students that identified with the following race and ethnicity groups: Black, white, Latinx, Asian, biracial, such as Black and white, biracial, other, and other. The current study measured demographics such as student gender, ethnicity, and age, while also measuring discrimination in discipline and school belonging. In more detail, when measuring discrimination in discipline, students were asked questions such as, how often are you punished by teachers in your school, more than kids with a different ethnicity? The answers to these questions were measured on a TAIL scale ranging from 1, not much, to 4, a lot. The participants were also asked questions that measured school belonging. This was also measured using a scale that measured from 1, not much, to 4, a lot. In figure 2, this demonstrated school belonging and how children were stereotyped at school and have a higher sense of school belonging compared to students who are not. The results of our study showed that school belonging differed by race. For example, students that were stereotyped as good, such as the white and Asian students, had a higher sense of school belonging compared to their Black, biracial, Latinx peers that were also stereotyped as bad. Furthermore, experiencing racial discrimination in discipline predicted that having a lower sense of school belonging. Also, the relationship between discrimination and discipline was not moderated by children's race. In figure 3, this shows that experiencing disproportionate discipline predicts belonging. In conclusion, we found that sense of school belonging differed by race, and students that more often experienced racial discrimination and discipline also had a lower sense of school belonging. In the future, understanding how racial discrimination is impacting children's race of belonging is vital to disrupting the school to prison pipeline. Therefore, future research should investigate how experiencing discrimination in discipline and related lower sense of belonging impacts children's emotional and academic outcomes.
Good job, Destiny. That was very clear, precise. I like it, and very interesting research, I have to say.
Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions for Destiny, please put them in the Q&A box. In the meantime, while we wait for a question to pop in, Destiny. Tell me how you got involved in research with Dr. Brown.
I was actually a sophomore and I was looking to get into a research lab that, surrounded my interests. And of course, because I wanted to go to graduate school, I needed to, get more experience in research. And of course, I participated in the undergraduate showcase my freshman year through STEMCats. I also had a little bit of experience of that. So Dr. Brown really helped me, really touch bases on what I want to do once I'm in graduate school.
Okay. And you're talking about graduate school. So tell me, what do you want to do with your career after you leave?
Sure. So in the fall, I will be attending the University of Kentucky for 4 more years to get my doctorate degree in school psychology. And my focus that I want to, really surround myself with is behavioral disorders such as autism and how racial and ethnicity discrimination impacts children's academics and academics impact.
Okay. I saw okay. Here's a message for you question for you that did not pop up into the Q&A, but into the chat box. And it says, when identifying schools, did you take into consideration the location? Were they public or private or a mix of both?
They were public schools.
They were all public. Okay. Okay, and then tell me, what was your most challenging aspect of your research, and how did you overcome that challenge, or did you?
I think the most challenging was not playing into bias, because I know that minority children, such as Black and Latinx children, do experience these type of things, and I didn't want what the knowledge that I already know impact this study. So I didn't want my bias and what I already know to impact the results of this, already predicting what would happen, if that makes sense.
Okay. And obviously you were able to do that.
Yes.
All right, let's see. We have a chat question. Or let's see, is it in the chat? No, let's see, is that one in the Q&A? It popped up, but I don't see it now. Oh, wait.
It is in the chat.
It's in the chat. Okay.
Yes.
I see it now. I thought it was the same question there for a minute. It says, do you know how many schools were used in your study? And do you think that different school atmospheres would have different results?
I'm not sure exactly how many schools were used during this study. That's a question for our graduate assistant, Charla, because she is really over this. And as far as environments impacting, students' sense of belonging, different ones, I definitely think that there is a difference in between which school environments children are in and how that might affect their sense of belonging.
Good job.
Thank you.
So I don't think we have any more questions. Thank you very much, Destiny. We'll move on to the next presenter. So our next presenter is Hines. Evie's going to show your announcement slide. There you go. Miss Hines. Thank you. And you may share your screen, Anne.
Okay.
And you are unmuted, so you're good to go.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So like they said, I'm Anne Hines. I was lucky enough to be able to conduct research on juror perceptions of child physical abuse with Dr. Jonathan Golding this past semester. A lot of the research in this field focuses on child sexual abuse. So being able to focus on child physical abuse was a great opportunity for unexplored and really valuable insights. And that was the real purpose behind this research question. So this study manipulated the type of physical punishment. So subjects were presented with either a paddling situation or a spanking situation, and it also manipulated the type of charge between first degree and third degree charges. So just so you all know, a first degree charge is a Class C felony in Kentucky, it carries a prison sentence of 5 to 10 years, and it involves intentionally abusing another. And a third-degree criminal abuse charge is a Class A misdemeanor that carries a prison sentence of 90 days to 1 year and involves recklessly abusing another. And the participant gender was also considered when forming hypotheses and results. So I formulated 3 hypotheses. The first is that participants would be more likely to convict in the paddling condition than in the spanking condition. The second is that female participants would make more pro-victim judgments than male participants and therefore convict at higher rates than male participants. And the third is that an interaction would occur between punishment type and assault degree, where the paddling condition would be convicted at high rates in the first and third degree, but the spanking condition would only be convicted at high rates in the third degree compared to the first. So 185 community members were recruited to participate in this study. 76 were male and 109 were female. It was a between subjects design where participants were presented with one of 4 possible scenarios. And those scenarios were spanking in the first degree, spanking in the third degree, paddling in the first degree, and then paddling in the third degree. Otherwise, all of the witnesses and testimony and facts of the case were kept synonymous throughout all conditions. Participants were also all presented with an image of a bruise, and that image was kept consistent across all conditions, regardless of what punishment type was said to have caused it. The scenario involved 8-year-old Michael Turner as the alleged victim and his father, Victor Turner, as the defendant. We heard testimony from the 2 of them, as well as Michael's doctor and 2 neighbors, all involving the situation that Michael had failed to complete his chores and was then punished severely by his father, despite Michael begging him to stop. After participants ran through that trial scenario, they were asked whether or not they would find the defendant, Victor Turner, guilty or not guilty. And then they were asked a series of questions regarding their perceptions on the trial as a whole, the victim, and the defendant. The results we found supported our first hypothesis. Paddling was convicted at higher rates than spanking for both male and female participants. The individual breakdowns for male and female are under that results tab if you want to look at them, but overall, 53% was the conviction rate for paddling condition and 37% was the conviction rate for the spanking condition. Hypothesis 2 was also supported, involving participant gender, so female conviction rate was higher than males. Females said guilty about 52% of the time, and males said it 36%. Hypothesis 3 was actually only partially supported, and I'll direct your attention to the graphs that correlate with hypothesis 3. So that top graph is female conviction rates. The purple line represents the first degree, the blue line the third degree, the left value is the paddling condition, and the right value is the spanking condition. And that aligns really well with my initial hypothesis. As you can see, paddling was convicted at high rates regardless of degree, while spanking was only convicted at high rate in the third degree. But if you want to look at the graph below that, which shows all that same information, but for male participants, that does not align with the hypothesis. They actually convicted at higher rates in the third degree with spanking or with paddling than the first degree. There's a big difference there. And in spanking, they actually convicted higher in the first degree. So just to bridge into the discussion of that a little bit, the fact that females convicted more than males convicted aligns with a lot of the previous literature on child abuse in general, whether it be sexual or physical or another variable. And so that was consistent, and that's great. The other 2 hypotheses were formed off the assumption that paddling would be perceived as the more severe form of punishment and spanking would be perceived as a more common form of punishment that perhaps could cause harm but wasn't intentional. And that was supported by our results in hypothesis 1 and the female participants in hypothesis 3. But perhaps why the males didn't fit that pattern is because they actually perceived spanking to be the more severe form of punishment, either due to bodily contact or possibly because the image of the bruise that was presented to participants was very severe and implied that the force behind a hand would have to be so intense that it would have to be intentional and therefore have higher first-degree convictions. Overall, the study gave us a lot of information on child physical abuse. It shows how differently men and women perceive these scenarios. It also shows that the type of punishment matters, even if the injury is held constant and the same. And it shows that the degree that a defendant is charged with can make it more or less likely that they will be convicted. There were obviously limitations, like the sample size could always be bigger. Also, we weren't allowed to allow for jury deliberation like in a real courtroom. So future studies could add those, as well as look at a lot of other variables like victim gender or perpetrator gender, or whether or not that image was presented. But overall, it was really important research, and I was thrilled to participate in it. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Good job, Anne. Thank you so much. That was very good. So while we're waiting on questions to pop into the Q&A, can you tell me how you got involved in research with Dr. Golding?
Absolutely. My sophomore year, I'm a junior now, I took his 320 class, forensic psychology, which I found very, very interesting. I'm a psychology major. I'm also a pre-law student. So it was one of my favorite classes here at UK. And then after that class was over, he asked me if I'd like to do research, and I was super excited. Research was definitely something I wanted to get into, and we got into it, and I'm doing it with them next year too. I'm really excited.
Good, good. It's so nice to have so many different opportunities here at UK with our academics as well, outside the classroom.
Absolutely.
Okay, so tell me what your most challenging aspect of your research was and how you overcame it, or did you?
All right, I think the most challenging aspect for us at the beginning was really figuring out which variables we wanted to manipulate, because there are so many variables to manipulate in this study, and there's not a ton of research on child physical abuse. So originally we wanted to manipulate all the variables we did, but also the defendant gender, the victim gender. We didn't know if we should show the image and all of the conditions. So I think the most challenging part was just really narrowing it down and trying to find a good starting point for the research that we could build upon, either me next year, future researchers. But we did obviously manage to narrow it down, but that was definitely really difficult.
So with your career, you want to go to law school, and you want to study family law? Is that?
I'm actually not sure yet.
Okay.
I mean, I find this very interesting, but I'm not absolutely positive what area of law I want to go into, but getting this kind of experience is amazing regardless.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, any other questions for Anne? All right, I think we're good.
Thank you so much.
Good job, thank you. Okay, our next presenter is going to be Emily Jones. Abby Russell is going to show your opening slide. So we have Emily Jones as our next presenter. And you may share your screen and begin whenever you're ready.
Okie dokie. Good morning. My name is Emily Jones, and I had the honor to work with Dr. Jonathan Golding as well. And we really investigated the perceptions of stalking in a civil trial. And so the reason that we chose to do a civil trial is because a lot of previous studies involved stalking as a criminal offense, and many people don't realize that civil court is a viable option for those that wish to seek some sort of compensation for what they've been through. So civil court is a very good option for those, because victims can receive the compensation in order to deal with their troubles, and they have more control over their case. Previous research has showed that many things affect juror perception. And one of these is giving a reason for filing in civil court. And so this just means that the victim is able to talk about why they chose to come to civil court, and it allows the jurors to get more information about the victim in the situation. So the current study examined whether participant gender giving a reason for filing or not, and which party is being sued, affects jury perception. We had 3 hypotheses based on past research. The first is that females will be more likely than males to rule for the plaintiff. This just means that they have more pro-victim attitudes. The second is that participants will rule more for a plaintiff and award more damages to the plaintiff when they offer a reason for bringing the defendant to civil court. And this is just related to the fact that they're able to really get an idea about how the situation affected the victim and why they feel the need to seek compensation. And the third is that more damages will be awarded to the plaintiff when a third party is sued rather than an individual. And this just means that whenever they're suing a university rather than the individual that perpetrated the crime, that they would be more likely to receive more money. So there were 220 adults that participated in this study, and they ranged from age 20 to 79. And the data was collected via a Qualtrics survey on Amazon's Mechanical Turk. And we did this just so that we could get a more generalizable group of people rather than just undergraduates. And they, the mock jurors read a fictional civil stalking trial, and the male was accused of stalking his ex-girlfriend. 4 people testified: the victim, the perpetrator, the university security guard that was called by the victim, and then the victim's roommate. And every participant was randomly assigned to one of these 4 conditions. After reading the trial summary, the mock jurors would make their decision for the plaintiff or the defendant. And if they sided with the plaintiff, then they decided how much in damages would be awarded, and it was up to $10,000. Following this, they answered a series of questions about the case just so that we could get more of an idea about their thought process behind why they made their decision. And this was related to victim and defendant credibility, how greedy they thought the victim was, etc. So the results were that the first hypothesis was supported. Females did have higher pro-victim thoughts than males, and this is shown in the figure 1, especially with the decision rating. As you can see, females rated sided with the plaintiff more than the males. And hypothesis 2 was not supported. Whenever the victim gave a reason for filing in civil law or court, it was not a significant predictor of the plaintiff decisions or damages awarded. Hypothesis 3 was also not supported. Suing the university rather than the perpetrator did not lead to significantly more damages awarded. And you can see this in figure 2. So this is just where the individual versus the third party and total victim credibility. And you can see that there's not much difference for males, but there is a slight increase for females. So all in all, it supported some of the past research in which women did display more pro-victim attitudes compared to male participants. And this study is important because it validates a victim's decision to go to civil court rather than criminal court, because it shows that mock jurors are willing to rule for the plaintiff, which might not be the case in criminal court. And one of the limitations that I think really had an impact is that they only took a survey. And so I think that a more realistic court setting would give much different results, because they would be able to actually see the plaintiff and the defendant and get more of a read on the situation. And if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Good job, Emily.
Thank you.
Okay. While we wait for any questions to pop up in the Q&A, why don't you tell me how you got involved with research with Dr. Golding? You may have already stated that at the beginning. Were you in his class?
I actually had the same situation as Annie. I was in his forensic psychology class, and then I also took careers in psychology with him. and I needed to get my honors credit. And so I asked him if I would be able to work with him. And he's just really been a big help throughout all of this. It's really helped me figure out that I do enjoy research and I do want to go to graduate school. So that was really important.
Awesome, great. Okay, so you have a question in the queue, and Emily asked, what would your next steps be on this research?
I think that if we were to conduct it in a more realistic setting and have like people be able to deliberate and give their decisions together, then I think that we would be able to figure out more, because obviously some of our hypotheses was not supported. And I think that being able to like really incorporate visual aspects, because nonverbal behavior is really important. And so I think that that would be able to, that would give us more answers, I guess.
So the next question for you is, what graduate degree are you planning to pursue?
I want to go into criminal justice. I've found out that forensic psychology is really the one thing that really interests me. And I hope to become a trial consultant in the future. And I think that the criminal justice degree would really help with that.
It's very interesting. Great, you have a comment that says great job.
Thank you.
All right. So if there's not any other questions for Emily, we will move to the next panelist. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our next presenter is Grace. Let Miss Russell show your introductory slide. There we go. It's Grace Markowski, and you may share your screen and begin at any time.
Right. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Markowski, and today I'll talk to you about associations between sleep and trajectories of respiratory sinus arrhythmia responding in children. So different patterns of the parasympathetic nervous system, or abbreviated as PNS, reactivity to stress or stressful events can create different vulnerabilities and negative outcomes for children during their childhood. And that could include depression and externalizing problems such as aggression. So I wanted to look at a variable of the PNS, and the way that we'll measure it was through respiratory sinus arrhythmia, which I will abbreviate as RSA. RSA is basically just showing the PNS innervation, and it's a measure of heart rate as well. So previous research has highlighted that sleep can be a contributing factor to maladaptive RSA patterns, such that poor sleep and poor sleep outcomes are associated with higher resting RSA in children. However, there haven't been any studies that had shown the relationship between sleep and RSA reactivity, such that we can see RSA patterns during that stressful event. So essentially, past research has shown RSA maybe at the beginning of a task and at the end of a task, and average that throughout the task, but they haven't shown the trajectory of the RSA during the task. So that's what we were looking at during this study. We hypothesized that worse child subjective and objective sleep variables will be associated with lower and more prolonged RSA reactivity. So essentially that lower child sleep objective variables, such as lower sleep activity and higher sleep activity and lower sleep efficiency, will create a less reactive PNS system. And we will see that through the RSA reactivity. So our methods, including bringing children into the lab and placing electrodes on their bodies so that we could look at their physiological data. So then after they were hooked up to the equipment, they were asked to sit quietly for a 3-minute baseline period so we could look at their RSA normally. And then they were asked to complete a 3-minute star tracing task. in which they received a piece of paper with a star on it, and they had to trace that star, except they could only look at the picture of the star through a mirror. So it's a little bit difficult and a little bit stressful to have to do in 3 minutes, especially for young children. So the 3-minute task was then divided into 6 30-second time periods so that we could look at the trajectory of the RSA throughout the entire task. And we averaged the RSA at each of those time periods. Along with that physiological data, we were also trying to assess the subjective and objective sleep variables. So to look at more of subjective sleep variables, children, parents, and teachers were asked to complete the school sleep habits survey, which asks a lot about the daytime sleepiness of the children, especially during school. And to assess the objective sleep variables, we asked children and parents to ask their children to wear an actigraph, which is essentially like a Fitbit that tracks the children's sleep. And so we were looking at their sleep duration in minutes, their sleep efficiency, so the percent of minutes spent asleep, and how many minutes they had sleep activity. So an example of the data that would be collected from an actigraph is shown in figure 1. So to assess this data, we used multi-level modeling, with level 1 equaling the time segment of the task and level 2 equaling the participant. The independent variable would be the sleep outcomes, and the dependent variable in this scenario would be the RSA variables. So we found that child daytime sleepiness, sleep-wake problems, and sleep minutes were unrelated to the trajectory of RSA during the task, such that there was no difference between the RSA trajectories for children with better sleep and children with worse sleep. However, we did find that sleep efficiency and sleep activity were related to the intercept linear, quadratic, and cubic terms of the trajectories of RSA. So we found that mean trajectory for the sample indicates an increase in RSA peaking around 60 seconds of the task, followed by decreases that will level off or return to baseline around 150 seconds. So you can see in figure 2A and figure 2B, the RSA trajectories for sleep efficiency based on the children with high efficiency, so better sleep, and children with low efficiency, which is worse sleep. And figure 2B shows the sleep activity. So children with more activity during their sleep would have lower sleep outcomes, and the lower activity sleep would have higher sleep outcomes or better sleep overall. So we found that there was an initial heart rate that was increasing at the beginning of the task. So right when the children started the task, their PNS kind of kicked in, and that was followed by an increase back to baseline and an overshoot at the end. So children with lower sleep activity and higher sleep efficiency, so overall better sleep, had higher levels of RSA that increased more in response to the stressor initially, but then declined similarly to participants with poor sleep. So basically the children with better sleep had their a more reactive RSA, and that means more reactive PNS system. So that means it's working a little bit better and responding to that stress. At the end of the task, we found that participants with lower sleep activity and higher sleep efficiency demonstrated slight increases in RSA, while those with poor sleep continued to show declines in RSA. So essentially, those children with better sleep were able to return to baseline a little bit faster than children who had worse sleep outcomes, which would take a little bit longer to return to their baseline for their PNS activity. So these findings suggest that the childhood sleep difficulties may alter the development of the mechanisms of the PNS, which help with homeostasis for the children, and that can potentially lead to reduced reactivity to stress and less rapid recovery from stress. So that's exactly what we saw in this study. Due to the sympathetic nervous system also playing a role, future research can look at the relationship between the PNS and the sympathetic nervous system related to child sleep problems, since this study just looked at child sleep problems relating to the parent's sympathetic nervous system. And I would just like to thank Dr. Keller and our grad student Kyle Ron for helping me with this project. And I will take any questions.
Good job, Grace.
Thank you.
I know that my sleep is very important. I'm sure it is for everyone. So you do have a question, and I can state that for you. And it's, how did you get interested in the research with Dr. Keller?
So I'm in Psychology Scholars. So I first was in Dr. Keller's developmental psychology class, and I thought she was really great, and her research was interesting to me. And she said that she was looking for research assistants. And that was my sophomore year, so a little bit over almost 2 years ago. And so I decided to join her research lab, and I've been in it ever since. And this started out as a summer research fellowship that I did last summer. So I kind of just went to her and tried to combine my interest in psychology and neuroscience into a project like this one.
Okay, so have you found, besides being in a pandemic, what was the other challenging aspect of some of your research?
I think the analyzing the results was a little bit difficult. So I worked with the graduate student Kyle on this project, and he also had a lot of interest in it once I kind of created the idea with Dr. Keller. And so I think just thinking of the multi-level modeling is definitely advanced for undergraduate student like myself. So I had to work a lot with him and trying to understand how that worked, and just understand how that's a lot different than maybe some of the simpler statistical tests. So I think that was the biggest barrier I had to face and overcome, and trying to just understand this research and the results from it.
All right, well, good job.
Thank you.
Yep, comment just says very interesting.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We will move on to our next presenter. A few minutes to cycle around. Peter is going to be our next presenter. So let me introduce to you Peter McCauley. Peter, you may share your screen and unmute yourself whenever you're ready.
All right, can you all see that?
Yes.
All right, so my name is Peter McCauley, and my research project focused on how children's wanted proximity would change when evaluating children adopted into same-sex parented families and children adopted into opposite-sex parented families, as well as how this would interact with child gender. So as for a little bit of background information, children adopted into same-sex parented families oftentimes report more instances of discrimination on the basis of their parents' sexual orientation. However, little research has really focused on this population, and even less research has focused on how their peers are really perceiving them in terms of wanted interaction. So a part of this discrimination can be attributed to how children actually develop different stereotypes through different social contextual markers that deem some groups particularly salient amongst children. So for example, sexual orientation, there really is a lack of exposure, discourse, and just in general representation overall, with children being exposed to this population, which can make children be a little more vulnerable to develop different stereotypes implicitly just by trying to categorize this population. And in terms of gender, children are being brought up and instilled that gender really is more of a binary system. So they're being taught to categorize individuals really efficiently based on this association, different gender schemas that they're developing. So in turn, this can lead to the formation of stereotypes, which can potentially lead to different prejudicial attitudes forming later on. And by focusing on these characteristics, active agents and how they form their peer groups and how they kind of form their different group socialization patterns. So it's especially important to examine how children are perceiving children adopted into same-sex parented families, given that they're already experiencing some of the discrimination that their parents face, and that intergroup contact has been shown to limit some of the prejudicial attitudes forming on later on in adolescence, especially towards LGBTQ+ individuals. So with this, the current purpose of the study was to investigate how children evaluated wanted proximity towards children adopted into same-sex parented families, and how this might change with child gender. So participants included 131 children, 61 identified as girls and 70 identified as boys, and the mean age was 7.79 with a range from 5 to 11 years old. So as for ethnicity, the majority of participants identified as white, followed by Hispanic, Black, other biracial, and Asian. So the materials used were pictures of opposite sex and same-sex parents and their children, and children were also read a small vignette about the family and child. So as previously stated, this is an understudied population, so there aren't a ton of validated measures examining how children perceive this population. So the measures were adapted from past studies examining different underrepresented ethnic minority groups, and specifically children's positive and negative affects towards these groups. So the current study focused on proximity, which was used with a scale from 1 not at all to 4 very. 1 indicated low levels of wanted proximity and 4 indicated high levels of wanted proximity. And it was also measured using 3 questions examining wanted friendship, which asked how much do you want to be friends with this child, interaction, so how much do you want to play with this child, and finally school attendance, so how much do you want this child to go to your school. As for the procedure, children were shown pictures of 6 families, 2 of them being straight, 2 of them having gay parents, and 2 of them having lesbian parents, and a picture of a boy and girl, which varied based on which vignette they were reading at the time. So they then responded to questions evaluating their desired proximity towards the child. As for the results, both boys and girls had significantly higher scores and for proximity for children and belonging to opposite sex parents than same-sex parents. And as for child gender, the graph on the left shows the proximity scores for participants identifying as girls. So across all 3 family makeups, participants identifying as girls, regardless of parent sexual orientation, had higher desires for proximity for children belonging to their same gender. Likewise, the graph on the right shows the proximity ratings for participants identifying as boys. So regardless of sexual orientation, the same trend can be seen. So across all 3 family makeups, boys also had higher proximity scores for boys, regardless of parent sexual orientation. In conclusion, this suggests that children have a stronger desire for interaction for children belonging to opposite sex parents than same-sex parents. And regardless of sexual orientation, children still prefer to interact with children of their same gender, which suggests that it appears as gender is more important than some of the family characteristics when children are evaluating how much they want to interact with others. So this also suggests that when children are evaluating some particularly salient groups, they fall back and use some gender characteristics to evaluate how much they want to interact with others. So future research should extend this by investigating how wanted interaction might be influenced by family characteristics other than just relying on peers' attitudes. So for example, how religious some parents might be, their political orientation, or even just their endorsements of sexualized gender stereotypes. And so another line of research should maybe focus on how these attitudes related to proximity might change throughout adolescence. All right, and that's all I have. If you all have any questions too, just put them in the Q&A.
Good job, Peter.
Thank you.
So you have a first question here, and it is, did anything surprise you about your results?
The one thing that really surprised me were the proximity ratings for gender, specifically between gay parents and lesbian parents. So for both boys and girls, they had higher proximity scores. For girls and lesbian, so participants identifying as girls had higher proximity scores for girls belonging to lesbian parents than gay parents. And likewise, participants identifying as boys had significantly higher levels of proximity for boys and belonging to gay parented families than lesbian parents. So I thought that was the one thing that really surprised me the most.
Do you think if the age range were older, this would have a different outcome?
I think it might. I don't think there would be any significant differences later on. So if you studied this in adolescence, especially since you're more likely to encounter these individuals and interact with more people in adolescence identifying as sexual or gender minorities, just given the fact that people are going to be more comfortable expressing their identities later on. So.
Okay, we wait just to see if there's any more questions from those in the audience. Tell me how you got involved in research.
Yeah, so I actually got involved my sophomore year when I took the statistics class for psychology with my graduate student mentor. So at the end of the semester, she asked if any of us wanted to be involved with research in her lab, and that's how.
Just took a simple question, right?
Yeah.
Good. What do you want to do with your career?
I want to apply to graduate schools next year for developmental psychology, studying how children develop different stereotypes towards LGBTQ plus individuals and how this might affect those individuals in the school context and kind of later on in life. So.
All right, good deal. Thank you very much, Peter.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we're gonna get ready for our next presenter, and that is Morgan. Morgan, you are unmuted and you may share your screen at any time and go ahead and get started.
Okay, sounds good. Can everyone see my presentation?
There you go. Yes,
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. So good morning, everyone. My name is Morgan Ouellette. I worked with Dr. Golding on my research, and today I'm going to discuss the effects of jailhouse informant testimony on jury decision-making in a murder trial. It is no secret that the criminal justice system in the United States has many flaws, and one such flaw that is often called into question is the use of jailhouse informants in criminal trials. A jailhouse informant is defined as someone who provides testimony about his or her knowledge of a crime based on information obtained while incarcerated. The present study aimed to extend upon previous research on jailhouse informant testimony by investigating the impact of JI testimony in a jury context specifically. For this study, we employed 3 types of juries or conditions. The first type of jury, the jailhouse informant did not testify. There was no JI testimony. The second type of jury was one in which a jailhouse informant testified because the person felt sympathy towards the victim, which we define as a reliable jailhouse informant. And finally, the third type of jury that we used was one in which the jailhouse informant testified due to an incentive of a reduced sentence, which we defined as an unreliable jailhouse informant. We had 3 hypotheses for this research. The first is that participants would be more influenced by the reliable jailhouse informant than the unreliable jailhouse informant when rendering a guilty verdict. Our second hypothesis was that the reliable jailhouse informant will be perceived as more credible than the unreliable jailhouse informant. And our third hypothesis was that participants will find the reliable jailhouse informant more influential in rendering a guilty or not guilty verdict than the unreliable jailhouse informant. Our participant sample included 371 undergraduate students recruited through SONA in an introductory psychology course from a large Southeastern university. They did receive class credit in exchange for their participation. For our design, we used a one-way design with a 3 between jury conditions as previously discussed. Our main dependent variable that we examined was the jury verdict and individual participants' pre-deliberation judgments. For our materials, we included a trial recording summary, which was a fictional audio trial summary that involved a general description of a defendant charged with first-degree murder. The summary included a description of the trial, the prosecution's case, and the defendant's case. The general description of the trial was identical for each condition and included information about where the event occurred, when the charges were filed, and the description of the charges filed. All witnesses received direct and cross-examination and the judge's instructions. We also employed a reliability manipulation, as also discussed earlier, in which one jailhouse informant was considered reliable, and this jailhouse informant testified because he or she felt guilty, or he or she felt sympathy towards the victim, and the unreliable jailhouse informant who received incentive in the way of a reduced sentence for his testimony. Finally, we used pre-deliberation questionnaires in which participants responded to a question on a 10-point scale in which they rated their perceived credibility of the jailhouse informant from which they heard the testimony, 1 being not at all credible and 10 being completely credible. For the results of our research, as seen in Figure 1, our first hypothesis concerning jury verdicts was supported. Essentially, participants were more influenced by the reliable jailhouse informant when rendering a guilty verdict. As seen in Figure 2, our second hypothesis concerning jailhouse informant credibility was also supported. Reliable jailhouse informants were perceived as more credible than unreliable jailhouse informants by participants. Finally, as seen in Figure 3, our third hypothesis concerning jailhouse informant influence on verdict was also supported. Reliable jailhouse informants were perceived by participants as more influential in rendering a guilty verdict or not guilty verdict than the unreliable jailhouse informant. Overall, the results of this study support the original hypotheses for the research. Some limitations of this study were that we used a murder case specifically. If we had used a different kind of case, such as sexual assault, the results might have been different. Furthermore, our juries were predominantly female, which also could have skewed the results a bit. Some implications of this study point to how influential jailhouse informants are in the jury decision-making process. Specifically, it points to how attitudes of reliability of jailhouse informants influence decisions in a jury-making setting. No matter what type of verdict the jury is rendered, having a reliable jailhouse informant testimony proved to be significantly influential in their decision-making process. This information could be easily applied to present-day court practices when using juries in a trial, specifically for the purposes of this study, a murder trial. Some suggestions for future research would be possibly to look at gender differences specifically in rendering guilty verdicts and not guilty verdicts with jailhouse informant testimony, and possibly to examine the effects of jailhouse informant testimony in other trial settings, as said earlier, like sexual assault. That is all I have for you today, and I would now like to open the floor to any questions.
Thank you, Morgan. That was really good. So if you have any questions for Morgan, just put them in the Q&A. Use your button, it's at the bottom of your screen. While we wait for someone to pop in a question there, Morgan, tell me again how you got involved with research with Dr. Golding. Was it through class?
Yeah, so I actually hadn't taken his class at this point, but I knew that he did a lot of research with the intersections of law and psychology, and I've always kind of had interest in forensic psychology.
Okay.
So I was pretty bold and actually emailed him myself and asked if I could get involved in his lab. And it worked out really well. I went and met with him. We had a really good conversation, and I'm just really lucky to have this experience.
Good. Again, it just took one question, right? On your end instead of the professor's end. That's really great. Okay, you have a question in the Q&A, and it says, what are you planning to do after graduation?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm really interested in forensic psychology. I think it would be really interesting to work in the courtroom. I'm not sure if I want to do law yet, but I'm also interested in that. So just something where I can work with the criminal justice system. Yeah.
Have you yourself ever served on a jury?
No, I have not.
They're very interesting, I can tell you that. All right, any other questions? Emily just says, excellent job.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you.
Okay, our last presenter is Lydia Pack. Lydia, you may share your screen anytime you're ready. You're unmuted.
Okay. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
You see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, so my name is Lydia Pack. This past summer, I actually worked in Dr. Lorch's lab. And the question that I was asking in her lab is, to what extent does social problem-solving interventions help children at risk for ADHD? So to tell you just a little bit of background on ADHD, also known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it is the most commonly diagnosed childhood disorder. A lot of the symptoms that we see with children with ADHD are exhibiting elevated levels of inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity, or a combination of both. More importantly is that ADHD is known for causing children to struggle a lot socially with their peers and other relationships in their life. So often these children are labeled as problem children from a young age and experience issues in impulsivity control and decision-making, particularly in school settings. So because of this, these problems often affect their children's relationships with peers in their age range, which is significant because peer relationships have shown to be one of the greatest predictors of future delinquency or success. So the goal of this project was to address the social problems of children at risk for ADHD with an intervention that gave these children strategies for dealing more effectively with others. So to tell you a little bit of background on what our lab was doing, the study that I was looking at included 170 children, 64 females, from 18 different elementary schools in Lexington, Kentucky. So teachers were sent information about the program to parents of children in the bottom half of the class in comprehension and who showed symptoms of hyperactivity and/or inattention. If parents expressed interest and gave permission, teachers then completed formal ratings of ADHD symptoms to confirm if these children were eligible, and then the participating children were given a pretest, completed one of two interventions at their school, and then were given a post-test at the end of the intervention. And so these interventions, we had two different interventions. One is called a social problem-solving intervention, which consisted of 15 90-minute lessons targeting different aspects of social problem-solving. In some of these lessons, students learned about pro-social behaviors like cooperation, or other lessons focused on recognizing social problems and developing solutions to those. As well, they even talked about how to recognize their own negative emotions and deal with them healthily. And then we had a different intervention that was called a narrative structure intervention, or an NS structure intervention. And this was simply just telling or helping children to read and reading comprehension. And we focused less on this intervention. It was just mainly used as a comparison to our other social problem solving intervention. So as I said, there were two main research questions, which one of them was, do children who are at risk for ADHD report an improvement from pre-test to post-test on their social problem solving skills across both interventions? And number two, do children who are at risk for ADHD who receive the social problem solving intervention report better social problem skills at post-test relative to children receiving the narrative structure intervention? So let me show you the graphs. So these two graphs are showing you something called self-efficacy. And basically what that means is that a child believes that they are capable of doing the thing that they are supposed to do. So just to explain a bit more, you'll see on the left that it says self-efficacy on NS, or narrative structure items. So what you can see is that we have the blue line, which is the NS group, and the orange line, that's the PS group. And it's basically telling us that specifically on narrative structure items, do they feel confident that they could complete the task that was provided to them? You can see from pre-test to post-test on the NS, there was significant improvement. And on the right graph, you can see that there's significant improvement on the PS items for the PS group. So this is showing you that the interventions that we were doing were helping students to feel more confident to do the things that were specifically targeted by the intervention, if that makes sense. And then I have one more graph that I want to show you. This is called TOPS data, which is just like basically what the pre-test and post-test was measuring for the problem-solving intervention. And so these were 4 different categories that were being assessed by each pre-test and post-test. And you can see that there was significant improvement from pre-test to post-test on problem-solving, predicting, and causes, which were 3 of the 4 categories. On inferences, we saw a slight decrease, but on the other 3 categories, it was a significant increase, which shows that the problem-solving intervention was doing what it was asked for. I also just want to make a note that, so I actually did this research last summer, which was when COVID was a big deal. And so I wasn't actually able to go to the students and do this. So this was based on pre-existing data from the previous work that had been done in the research lab. But basically our results were that we found significant improvement on our problem-solving interventions, especially in regards to what social problem-solving skills the children needed in order to get along better with their peers. And now I can take any questions.
Good job, Lydia. That was very good. So while we are waiting for questions to pop up in the Q&A box, so was this the first time that you did research or worked with results regarding to research since you were working with past data?
This was the first time I had worked in this lab. I'd worked in a previous lab before. So it was really unfortunate that everything happened with COVID at the time, because ideally it would have been great to have actually gone in schools and seen the interventions, but it still gave us like a good analysis of how well they were already doing with the past data.
Good. So you have one question so far, and it's how did you choose the 2 intervention types? Also, did you find any differences based on gender?
Those are really good questions. So I actually didn't get to choose the 2 interventions because, like as I said, it was just based on past data that they had already collected. But the problem-solving intervention was especially something that the lab was interested in because children at risk for ADHD have so many problems with their social problem-solving skills. And then narrative structure was just an intervention that is like more of an academic skill, and a lot of the children at risk for ADHD just struggle with that. And then the other question, what was the other question? Oh, and are there any differences based on gender? So typically we see boys are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD compared to girls. But that doesn't mean that girls don't have ADHD. It just means that they typically show it in a different way than boys, and they're underdiagnosed compared to boys. But in our lab, we tried to make a pretty equal distribution of girls to boys. And I don't think there was any significant difference in how effective those interventions were for the genders.
In performing this research, has it influenced what you want to do with your career or further education?
I think currently I work with children, and so I definitely am very interested in children and like childhood psychological disorders. So I haven't decided for sure exactly what I'm doing right now, but I definitely think that children's psychology is something that I'm very interested in.
Good. Just have a comment that says thank you for your presentation. And I believe we are done since there's no more questions. Great job, Lydia.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Lorch says good job as well. She commented.
So I just want to say thank you to all the participants. You did a wonderful job. And thank you, Lynn, for moderating this session. You did a fantastic job as well.
Thank you.
All right, you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, good job, everyone.
Thank you.